Hi everyone, welcome to a tactics video. This time looking at, can the Death Rider unit actually work? I'm also going to look at Lord Dreir as well, and given both of these new model kits released in the Astra Militarum Codex release set for the Death Corps of Krieg, I wonder if we can actually make this unit work, because I looked at the rules, I've all looked at the rules, and they don't look that good on paper, but let's explore what they can do. Now this will be taking it from a tournament competitive scene point of view. To be very, very clear, if you play casual or crusade, you can make any unit work, it's just how effective they're going to be in the current meta. So I'm going to look at the actual data sheets, and then I'll sort of think about what these units can do, and then explore also on TTS, tabletop, to see how that actually can be used on the tabletop. So let's start off with looking at the core rules here. So I'm going to look firstly at the Death Riders, and then their closest comparison, which is actually the Rough Riders. So the Death Riders now are 60 points for 5, 120 points for 10. That is a point reduction. They've got cheaper in the recent balanced data slate, going from I think 70 to 60. So now they're the same price as the Rough Riders. And you can see across here, the key takeaways, they're basically identical to the Rough Riders. The key difference being actually, they've only got a 10-inch move, but the Rough Riders have got a 12-inch move. As we check their data sheet here, they've got a 12-inch move. Everything else from movement, save, wounds, leadership, OC, and the base size is identical. Now, when it comes to the actual weaponry, this is where obviously it's different. And the Rough Riders have got las carbines, which are assault weapons with 2 shots at range 18. So that's helpful because obviously it's better than rapid fire weapons. So you can see a las gun, obviously rapid fire 1 at 24-inch range, which means that within 12 inches you've got 2 shots, but with Death Riders you've always got 2 shots because they've got assault weapons. Now with assault being a keyword, that's helpful, but we're not talking about plasmas, melters, we're talking about las carbines, so you're going to be doing a little bit of plink damage. Also of note, the Death Riders don't have a las pistol versus the Rough Riders do, so that means when the Rough Riders are in the mixer, getting up and close and personal, at least they can fire their las pistol, so that's something, but the Death Riders can't. Now when it comes to melee, this is when it gets very different, is the Death Riders have got the Frag Lance, which is D6, hitting on 3s at 401 with the Lance keyword. Now, if you know the Rough Riders, they've got the same option, but then they can also take the Melter Tip, and the Melter Tip is one hit or one shot, hitting on 3s at 9 for D6, basically a melter up close and personal. So the Artillery Rough Riders can actually really trade up and do a load of damage. You can check out this video I've done here, where I get one of my patrons to discuss that unit as well, Rough Riders. But compared to the Death Riders, the reality is the Death Riders will do little to no damage into anything remotely serious. And there's a combination we'll look at in a moment. We're obviously working with Lord Dreir to make them a bit more spicy, but broadly speaking, this Death Riders do way less damage. Now, they also get a power saber, so you could opt, once they've made the charge and they're still alive, you go to the power saber because you've actually got more attacks reliably, 3 versus D6, and crucially the AP is 2 versus AP 0 on the Frag Lance. Now, the Artillery Rough Riders don't have that. They've just got the Lance with a Sergeant can take a power saber with 4 attacks, but interestingly, you probably get more reliable low-level melee output from the Death Riders, but if you're going into anything remotely serious, then you want to be using Melter Lancers, because obviously Melter Lancers can be wounding tough vehicles on 4, and AP 4 is very strong, which means you could actually kill some pretty nasty stuff with the Rough Riders, versus the Death Riders, who won't do that. Now they've then got 2 attacks from the Horsies, so that's hitting on 4s at 4, 1, 1. Interestingly, they've got AP 1, versus the Rough Riders have only got AP 0, but really with the Horsey attacks, it's just like a little bit extra. So the key takeaway from looking at the 2 data sheets, and this is probably the easiest thing to look at, is because of the same points and everything about them is basically the same except for the movement, it's very easy to compare these 2 units. Now, the Death Rider's ability is screening line, so once per turn, when an enemy unit ends a normal, advanced, or fallback move within 9 inches of this unit, and they're not within engagement range, this unit, they can make a normal move up to D6. Now, that is an interesting one. Definitely, I'd say it's more of a technical rule, and the way to kind of think about it if you're newer to 40k is the simplest abilities to understand are those that make you more deadly or more survivable. That's loosely how you could probably break, and there'll be exceptions to that, obviously always a lot of heroes, But in this example, this is not making you more deadly. It's making you potentially more survivable or more annoying because you can react to what your opponent does. Now, as we compare to the Artillery Rough Riders, they basically can eligible to shoot and declare a charge in the turn they fell back. So this actually makes you probably more deadly in the sense that if you get charged or you go into a charge and you survive the subsequent fight phase or fight phases, you can fall back and recharge. Versus if you decide to do it in the Death Riders, you just fall back and they can't get back in the mixer because they've fallen back as per the normal rules. So the key snapshot of all of this is fundamentally the Death Riders are a slower version of the Rough Riders. They're way less deadly, but they've got a bit of a finicky roar. So I'm going to capture all this in a second in a PowerPoint slide. So now let's look at the glorious Lord Marshal Dreir, not Dreyer, Dreir. Now his direct comparison is Lord Solar, given he is an epic hero and he's kind of serving a similar purpose. But let's look at his core rules. So move in a 10-inch, 4-up save, be it 4-up invul save or 4-up save, 6 wounds and a leadership of 7 and OC 2. Now, Lord Solar Leontis has got a 12-inch move. His toughness 4, 3-up save, a bit tougher. He's got 2 extra wounds and he's a bit more brave. So Lord Dreir, despite being from the Death Corps, is the same leadership as the rest of his line troopers versus the glorious Lord Solar actually is a bit more brave and more survivable. Now, points, of course, Dreir is 100 points and Lord Solar is 150 points, so 50% more expensive. But what you're getting for Lord Solar in comparison, as you look at Lord Dreir, is basically his melee, his output is pretty minimal. You've got a Lad's Pistol, great, one single las gun shot, las pistol shot. He's then got the Sabre as Sacrifice, which sounds cool. Now it's got 6 attacks hitting on 2s at strength 2, AP 2, 1 damage, and infantry 4+. So that basically means if you roll a 4+ into any infantry, you're doing a wound regardless. If you're going into say toughness 7 or 8 infantry, if you roll a 4 up, you will automatically wound them. So that's good. Then it's got the Horsey doing 2 attacks, but the key takeaway from this is not a good weapon. 1 damage makes this really unexciting. If this was 2 damage, that would make it actually okay, but being 1 damage is fundamentally pretty bloody bad. He's then got a 6 that feel no pain. Cool, so that kind of makes probably his 6 wounds become 7. Yeah. He can then give commands, so he can give, I believe, 3 commands to regimental units, so that's cool. And his gimmicky rule, which is fundamentally quite gimmicky, is when he dies, on a 2-up he stands back up again with D3 wounds remaining. So this is cute, this is cool, having a character that can stand back up again. It's fantastic with D3 wounds, so it could be battle shocked because it'd be below half. But given he actually doesn't do much in combat, this is probably more academic. Now where he gets interesting, and we'll get back to this in a second through some Mathammer, is he can do dev wounds to himself and the unit he is part of on the charge. So the unit he can be attached to is obviously Death Riders. Now let's not spend too much time on Lord Solar, but what you're getting for Lord Solar is a bloke who's got a very decent pistol, 8.22 with 2 shots hitting on 2s, and he's fundamentally got a 6 attacks of a power fist. You're hitting on 2s at 6.22. So he's actually relatively, he can look after himself in combat and also quite shooty. His ability, he gives you extra CP in your command phase, very good. And he can also basically allow, before the game begins, to redeploy 3 Astra Militarum, which is a really good rule you should definitely be using if you're taking him. He can be attached to everything, pretty much. And he can issue Regiment, Squadron, and now Titanic, which has been added back. So at 50% more you're paying for Lord Solar, I think pragmatically he's way better than Dreir, but let's get back to that. So with that all examined, let's look at then my PowerPoint slides. So what is this unit? So let's talk about the Death Riders. So they're fundamentally, as I said, a slower version of Rough Riders. They share all the same keywords, core rules, and are now priced the same as 60 points for 5 or 120 points for 10. So the comparison of Rough Riders is really easy. Now, they're deceptively resilient for guard non-vehicle units. So both of them, Death Riders and Artillery Rough Riders, given their toughness 4 and all infantry is toughness 3, okay, they've got a 4-up save. That's better than a 5-up save on battle line. They've got 2 wounds. And of course, you can give them an order because they're regiment. You can be saving on 3s. You essentially then have got Space Marine bodies, yeah? Some Space Marine horses with a 4-up toughness 4, 3-up save with an order and 2 wounds. Now that's a lot better than, say, 10 jungle fighters who've got toughness 3, 1 wound and a 5-up save or a 4-up save if you give them an order. So they are more resilient than a lot of our squishier units, which I think Guard definitely is an army, which is either tanks or squishy units, i.e. infantry. So they're deceptive resilient. Now also, I won't speak loads about different detachments, but definitely in the recon detachment, there is a stratagem where you give these guys a 6-up field open and -1 to hit in shooting if they're the closest visible target. So that could buff them as well. So at least a stratagem support, but it's not going to speak too much about detachments because I don't know if you'd be building a list just full of horses and trying to make it. Well, you might be, but I don't know. Cool. So then their output is significantly worse than Rough Riders. So as I said before, just simply looking at it, and I got Mathammer to sort of examine what they can actually do versus Rough Riders who do fundamentally way less damage. Yeah, 10 Melter Lancers could bring low pretty much everything in the game. Of course, if you've got a hit, you've got a wound, they've got to fail their saves. But the reality, we'll look at Mathammer in a second, is that 10 Death Riders won't kill everything in the game because they just don't have the output. Now, mounted keyword presents an issue with terrain. This is definitely one to consider. I would say, from a personal perspective, I'm very clear how to maneuver vehicles around the tabletop and infantry. And I've given vehicles to go around terrain, it's obvious, but infantry can move through terrain, but mounted can't move through terrain. So for me, it's a bit weird because the actual unit size is quite big. It actually becomes bigger than a block than say a Lehman Russ battle tank. So actually got to remember that it's a bit more restrictive in where they can get to on the tabletop. Now, let's flick now to some Mathammer, because I do want to explore their output to justify what I'm saying about the Rough Riders. So what I've got here in this pretty Excel spreadsheet is I've mapped out. So firstly, the target which we're thinking about is a toughness 4 3-up save target, and I've assumed that they've received the fixed bayonets order, so they're getting additional weapon skill, hitting on 2s for the Lancers or hitting on 3s for the Horses with their Savage Claws. So I've run a couple of scenarios, which is if you go all in and take Dreir, or Dreir correctly, is D-R-E-I-R, 10 of them with Dreir. The crucial thing, as we spoke about, we saw earlier, is Dreir gives you devastating wounds. So we've got 10 Frag Lancers. I'm assuming you're going to be getting 35 actual shots out of it. You roll your 10 dice, you get 35 on average. That means if you're hitting on 2s, you get 29 hits. And then of those 29 hits, on average, 5 of those will be devastating wounds. Now, likewise for the Savage Claws, given this is weapon skill 3, you go from 20 hits, because you get 10 horses with 2 hits, suddenly becomes 13 landed hits, which means you get 2 devastating wounds. Now, then you have the rest of your wounds, and given you strength 4 and lance, you're wounding on 3s, you then got 15 successful wound rolls, or 4 successful wound rolls on the Horses. And that means because you've got basically AP 0 on the Frag Lance and AP 1 on the Horse Hooves, your opponent fails 5 saves and 2 there, which means the unit by itself, without Dreir attached, is getting out 14 actual successful wounds. Now that's going into a toughness 4 body with a 3-up save. If you're going into a tank, which is say toughness 8 or above, or maybe even, probably anything basically, higher than a toughness 4, actually. And if they've got a 2-up save, you can expect this to completely drop off a cliff, because you're going to be wounding on 5s and they're going to be saving on 2s, if not 3s, on a couple of Horse Hooves. So this is a concern. Now, if we chuck Dreir in the mix, and I'm assuming we're going to infantry targets once again. He's got 6 hits, 6 attacks. He's going to get 5 of those. Some will be devastating wounds because he's targeting an infantry unit, is the assumption. And he's going to do about 3.5 or 4 successful wounds, which means that unit in totality will do 18 successful wounds into a toughness 4 3-up save unit. So this will basically pick up a 5-man squad of intercessor Space Marines, or even more so, because 18 wounds, that's essentially 9 2-win bodies. Now, this will cost you 220 points. That is getting quite a lot. And if you're going to spend 220 points to clear out a unit of Space Marines worth, I don't actually know how much it costs, say 150, it feels like a lot. Yeah, it's a big investment. Now, if we just run 10 dudes or just run 5 Death Riders, you can see the output is either 10 wounds or 5 wounds for 120 points or 60 points. So Dreir will boost the output because you've got the extra devastating wounds, but it is becoming quite expensive. If you run him plus the dudes together, charge them around, clean up a couple of things, but I haven't mapped out the Rough Riders, but the reality is if you did this exercise for Rough Riders with the Melter Lancers, they would do exponentially way more damage. And the potential for that, they may not actually do the damage, the Rough Riders, but the potential is something you say to your opponent is like, I've got 10 attacks hitting on 2s with Melter Lance, strength 9, AP 4, D6 damage. That's going to control what they do because they might think actually that thing could kill my Big Knight or my Regal Dawn versus you tell them about this and they'll be like, yeah, cool, okay, whatever, just run around the tabletop and look cool. So this is painting the picture. Hopefully it's relatively convincing to you that their output is pretty bloody bad. But that will then go on to, what we actually will use this unit for. So their ability could be useful, but maybe only in squads of 5. I'll look at this in a second on Tabletop Simulator. Now, a reactive move in your opponent's phase is relatively unique for Astra Militarum. The only one I can confidently know is in the mechanized attachment. You can pay a CP and use a stratagem to reactive move a transport. But this, I think, is the only unit I think in the Codex which can reactive move in your opponent's turn. So that makes them quite unique. Now, as I said, when paired with Dreir, I don't know actually. They can inflict acute amount of chip damage, as we've shown before. However, it does become a big investment of 220 points, as I spoke about. So now let's look at some potential effective ways to use it. So if they're not going to do any damage, what are you going to use them for? So they could definitely be an early game skirmish piece. I mean, they move 10 inches, they've got the regiment keyword. They could definitely, we've moved, suddenly got a 13-inch move. With Duty 9, they got OC2 bodies, so they definitely could be something to trade quite easily. Now, when I say trade, they probably won't do much damage, but they could, definitely go about, contest early objectives your opponent holds, or try and do early secondaries, or try and do early screening, which we'll speak about in a second. And one definitely key point is they're actually probably the cheapest sort of like large model count unit because they're 60 points. Battle line now is 65 points. 5 points is 5 points, but they are actually cheaper. And I would weirdly say if you are going to take them, if you're going to trade off, say, 10 jungle fighters or this unit, I would trade off this unit because jungle fighters are OC2, you can be OC3, and you've got 10 of them, that's OC30, versus 5 Death Riders is OC2, OC5 or OC10. Now, the reactive move can be helpful and could potentially keep them alive for longer. And we'll look at this in a second on Tabletop Simulator. Now, again, linked to the idea of early game skirmish piece or cheap action unit is that they could be quite an aggressive movement block and a screen. And the reactive move here could be very helpful to fundamentally really hem your opponent in, to protect objectives we'll look at in a second, or maybe counter rapid ingress or deep strike, which we'll look at in a second, yeah? So let's go to Tabletop Simulator to hopefully paint a bit of a picture how I'm thinking you can maybe use it. So to be very clear, this unit is not an output unit, not going to do loads of damage. Yes, you could charge them into some cultists or some other guardsmen. They're going to wrap them up because they're going to struggle to wound them. But if you put them into anything remotely serious, which got like even power swords, they're probably going to get chopped up. But that being said, I think as I'm thinking about all this, they don't have loads of output, but this is where the experience of 40k comes into it, is that you should always be asking about. So let's say, okay, we're going to get to the actual example, but if we're going to charge some Death Watch, a Death Watch kill team, we've got 2 Thunder Hammers, 2 dudes with power swords, and a devastating wound sword, and you've got, say, 6 attacks here, 6 attacks here, and 5 attacks here, for example, 4 attacks, hitting on 3s, hitting on 4s, with reroll 1s. You're probably like, okay, this unit could probably pick up these dudes because they're AP3, 3 damage, they're AP2, 1 damage, and that's devastating wounds. So this is when you should probably just ask your opponent, do you think this unit could actually kill them in combat? Because even if only 1 horse survives, that unit is wrapped up in your opponent's turn and can't do anything. But of course, if you're going to charge into 6 blade card veterans, you're just asking to get obliterated. So anyway, so let's now think about if, for example, we want to counter deep strike or a rapid ingress, because definitely rapid ingress is a very good stratagem in 10th edition. It can really catch you out and really sort of throw out your game plan, because again, if we just assume, and just really illustrate it, bring it to life, is that if you finish your move here, your opponent could rapid ingress here. I'm telling you stuff you probably already know. And then in their turn, if they're 9 inches away, let's say it's a very stabby unit, you don't want to charge it because you just die. In their turn, they can then move 6 inches, and then they can go about and get in the mixer. However, if you want to, say, protect this space here, just pretend, you decide to basically move these boys out. So that's 2.5. We then have another now 2.5 and then 3.5. Put some, say, here. Let's go. 3.5 is here. And then you're like, okay, that's all my movement done, and your opponent does a rapid ingress. So the rapid ingress now puts it back here. So the reason why I'm being quite careful in where they move them out is, given they've got a reactive move of 6 inches, you want to basically be making sure that when they can do that actual reactive move, you get value out of it. So what I'm trying to engineer here is, let's say we go to my opponent's turn. They then naturally move, say, 6 inches because they want to get in the mixer. Let's just keep it like they just go this way, 6 inches. They're like, yeah, cool. I want to get in the mixer, get in melee next turn. And in my turn, so what you then do is basically reactive move your horsey 6 inches. Let's just put one over here to illustrate the example. Okay, all the way over there. And this one goes back 3 here, and then it goes reactive another 3 inches back here. So, you've then made your opponent's charge a bit longer. So now it's become maybe an 8 inch on the nose. If we go back a bit more, not cheating, I mean, but like, it's gone from, say, I think it was a 3 inch charge to now an 8 inch charge. So again, an 8 inch charge is doable. Is it guaranteed to go off? No. But at least you're making things a bit tougher for your opponent, yeah? Now, the other way to think about this, and actually I'll go to this example over here, is let's pretend you've got some Def Corps of Krieg. Great, you've got Def Corps of Krieg and Def Riders. We're going to get this. So you've got this battle unit protecting this, holding this objective. Yeah, and again, your opponent's in the terrain here, and they come out, they want to get, let's a little bit further back here. So they then move 6 because they want to get in the mixer. They're like, right, you finished the move within 9 inches of me, and I want to protect this objective. I don't care if this unit dies because I want to hold the objective for one more turn. I then reactive move the horsey 6 inches. So they basically trottle up here. They all stand there like that and basically get ready to die for the Emperor, because in this instance, you've made the decision that their death is more important than you losing this objective, yeah, because you want to hold this objective with the Def Corps of Krieg dudes in here, and you've basically reactive moved completely onto your opponent, so all they've got to do is roll a little tiny charge, versus if you decided to, let's say they came out here, sure, you could move backwards, and again, this is where you have to check what you can do is, let's say they did come here, and then now they're within 6 inches, maybe you do just move away. Yeah, you do basically go, right, I'm now 6 inches. Now there they've still got a charge potential of 9 inches. So again, you want to work out, do I value their lives more, or do I want to basically make sure there's no way my opponent can get onto the objective? So let's pretend they've got a +1 to charge because they're Blood Angels, or they've got a free reroll to charge. In that case, you would definitely basically say, look, glorious Death Riders, you're going to basically stand here and die for the Emperors. I want you to block off the objective. So the reactive move, obviously, is their key rule. Now you want to get value out of it, yeah? So this is where, again, if they were infantry, if they were an infantry unit and they could reactive move, they could simply just go 6 inches, boop, they just go through the terrain and hide there. They go an inch off the wall, so your opponent can't charge you, blah, 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 all that standard tactical magic you do. But given they're mounted, it's significantly more restricted than being able to move freely through terrain. So this is where I think, and again, I'm trying to make this work. I think if they could reactive move a bit further, could be helpful, but still, a reactive move is unique to Guard. It definitely could be helpful in certain scenarios. But I would say, and this applies to me as well, is if you're not super duper experienced and play a fair bit, I think you're going to struggle to get value out of the rule because it is relatively finicky And yeah, you're probably going to, you know, maybe do what I did there. You can extend the charge from being 3 to 5. Okay, cool. Or here you just simply movement block completely. So, you know, it's something. Is it as good as fall back and charge and shoot? The answer is no. But I think the key thing to remember here, as I go back to my PowerPoint presentation, as we look at the summary, is that I didn't put the point here, is that this unit simply just exists. Yeah, they do minimal output. They just stand in the way of things. They just move around and be annoying. Yes, into low-level chaff, as we saw here, they're going to do a fair bit of damage. So let's pretend your opponent has got a 5-up save. So let's swap the math. So this would then be 4 of 6. You know, suddenly if they've got only a 4-up save, sorry, a 5-up save, even with just the frag lances, given they've got a 5-up save versus a 3-up save, it does boost the math. But as soon as you go into anything with an armor save of a 3+, you're doing, you know, some damage, obviously, because you've got loads. But again, their output is not what they're all about. So, you know, if we go back to the PowerPoint, so again, from a meta point of view, if you're playing remotely competitively, Rough Riders simply are the better choice. They move further, they've got way more output, and they've got a better ability. And that being said, I think, you know, 1 or 2 units of a 5-man Death Rider team is fine. They could be an early game skirmish piece. Again, 60 points is cheaper than 65 points for some Jungle Fighter, some Cadians, or some Death Corps. And they can definitely be, you know, an early trade piece to just go about turning off objectives, standing in the way of things, or doing secondary objectives early in the game. Now, unfortunately, Dreir just frankly sucks. You know, a 1 damage saber on an epic hero is utterly turd. Again, if his saber was a 2 damage, that would be great. Yes, he stands back up. Yes, he gives devastating wounds onto the rest of the unit. But again, you know, he himself isn't that good. And one thing I did miss, and this again is just academic because it's only 1 wound, is that when he's attached to a unit, he will do devastating wounds on 4+ into infantry. So that's how it activates. Is if you're doing dev wounds, if you're going into infantry, you roll 4 up. Let's say you go into custodies, where this actually is helpful. Is that you'll be wounding on 4s, and every 4 is a devastating wound. That's how it works. This is how that type of thing works. So on the charge, with a unit attached, you could be quite good into that. But again, it's only 1 damage. If it was 2 damage, it'd be good, but 1 damage is just turd. So his rules just simply stink. It's a real shame because he looks pretty cool, and he's a cool model to run, but you know, if he was 80 points, you consider it, but, you know, I just don't see a place. But again, you're playing Crusade, you're playing, you know, casually with your friends, he's completely fine. But again, from a meta point of view, you know, I just don't see a role for Dreir, unfortunately. I do see a potential role for 1 or 2 units of 5-man Death Riders, but beyond that's pretty much it. So, hopefully helpful. I know for a lot of you, you may have gone and bought the actual starter set, which has got a load of these. It's got this hero. I actually bought it and refunded it because I was like, I saw the rules and I was like, forget it. But you know, I do think there is a little bit of potential. 1 unit of these, just a 5-man running around again to do some, just stand in the way, have that reactive move could be helpful. But to be very clear, if you're remotely competitive, I mean, as you know, seeing any of the winning Astra Militarum lists is that this is 2 units just don't appear anywhere, unfortunately. So what do you think? What's your experience using these units? If I've got anything wrong, please tell me. If you've got a different perspective, you don't agree with what I've been saying, please tell me as well, because I'd love to learn from you. And just any other general comments or thoughts about this unit or this style of content. So as always, if you enjoyed this video and want to support me, you can do so with a like, comment, or by subscribing, becoming a channel member, or joining my Patreon platoon. You can also actually buy some custom dice I had produced by the great ladies and gents by Dice Brand in the USA. Check the description below for details on how to buy them. But they've got a nice little channel logo, and hard to see in the light here, but they've got like a nice little camouflage finish as well. Super thanks to all my subscribers, patrons, and channel members. I really appreciate the support you give me. So get your bayonet sharp, las gun oiled. Faith for the Emperor strong. Patreon platoon, sound off. Tank Commander Glenn, Tank Commander Mitchell, Tank Commander Watchdog Van Etten, Lieutenant Burke Nielsen, Lieutenant Smith, Colour Sergeant DuPont, Sergeants Adal, Scott, the Colonel Merrill, Veterans Gibson, Hall, Lundeen, Guardsman Beard, Coquelin, Easingwood, Hills, Lyons, Malik, Nitton, Medicae Rolfe, Tontkin, Conscripts England, Evanghan, Goodwin, Honorary Members Balgrim King, Syker Smith, Cyan Gaylard, Aquilon Nassine.